She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. In the middle of the board meeting, while slides glowed behind her, she said, "The recent delays are largely due to operational liability." Then she looked at me. Not long, just enough. I felt 20 eyes shift in my direction. Directors, investors, advisors. No one spoke. I didn't defend myself. I didn't interrupt. I just sat there and let the words settle in the room. Liability. 3 days later, she was the one holding the audit report, and the room felt very different. Stay with me, because what happened after that meeting wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quieter than that, and the silence that followed revealed more than any argument ever could. The meeting took place in the main conference room at Alderon Biotech. Glass walls, long walnut table, 12 leather chairs, though we rarely filled all of them. I had been COO for 4 years. Elena was CEO. We weren't just executives. We were married. That arrangement had been efficient at first. We trusted each other, built the company from a small research startup into a respected mid-size biotech firm. But growth changes dynamics. Over the last year, Elena had taken more direct control. Investor calls, strategic acquisitions, public appearances. I handled operations, manufacturing timelines, vendor contracts, unseen work. The delays she referenced weren't new. A supplier in Singapore had failed a compliance review. We rerouted production. That caused a 6-week setback. I had explained it privately. Apparently, that wasn't enough. When she said operational liability, her tone was calm, professional, almost clinical. She clicked to the next slide without looking at me again. No one asked follow-up questions, but the implication lingered. After the meeting, the board members dispersed in clusters, quiet murmurs, controlled expressions. I stayed seated, reviewing my notes, even though I wasn't reading them. Elena approached slowly. "You didn't need to say that," I said quietly. "It was factual," she replied. "It was public. This is a board. Transparency matters. Transparency isn't the same as assigning blame." Her eyes didn't harden, they sharpened. If operations were tighter, we wouldn't be discussing this. The sentence landed heavier than the word liability. I kept my voice even. "Are you questioning my performance?" "I'm questioning results." There was no audience now, no investors, just us. "You've never called me a liability before," I said, "because I didn't have to." The answer was smooth, immediate. I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest, not anger, doubt. Over the past months, I had sensed a shift. Elena had begun reviewing my emails more closely, requesting secondary approval chains, asking for data I had already provided. Small signals. At first, I thought she was just tightening standards as we scaled. Now I wasn't sure. "Why now?" I asked. She gathered her tablet. "Because growth exposes weak points. And you think I'm one." She hesitated. "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said." Silence. Not defensive, measured. "I can't afford instability," she said. Instability. The word echoed strangely similar to something we had argued about at home 2 weeks earlier. She had mentioned bringing in an external operational consultant. I had disagreed. "We don't need another layer," I told her then. "It complicates decision-making." She had responded, "Maybe we need fresh eyes." Now I wondered if she had already made her mind. That afternoon, an internal memo circulated. Independent operational audit, requested by the CEO. 3 days, fast turnaround. That detail bothered me. A proper audit takes weeks. 3 days meant something targeted. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I reviewed our internal metrics, supply chain variance, inventory cycles, compliance flags. Everything matched projections, given the supplier issue. No hidden red flags, no unreported risks. Still, doubt crept in. What if I had missed something? That night at home, she was quiet. We ate dinner without discussing the board meeting. Finally, I said, "You initiated the audit?" "Yes." "Before today?" She didn't answer immediately. "Yes." "How long ago?" "Last week." So she had planned it, before calling me a liability publicly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed objective results." "I'm not objective?" "You're involved." The phrasing stung. We built this company together. And that's exactly why objectivity is difficult. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was controlled. I watched her carefully. No guilt, no hesitation, just conviction. "You think I'm slowing the company down. I think we've plateaued operationally. And that's on me? It's your division." I nodded slowly. There it was, clear lines being drawn. Over the next 2 days, the audit team moved through the office quietly. 2 external analysts, 1 internal finance officer. They asked for access to procurement records, manufacturing logs, vendor communications. I gave them everything. I didn't obstruct. I didn't defend. I wanted to see what they would find. On the second day, I noticed something subtle. One of the analysts asked specifically about a new vendor contract Elena had personally approved. It wasn't under my division. It fell under strategic partnerships. Why were they reviewing that? I didn't comment. I just observed. Late that evening, I stayed behind reviewing archived emails, not searching for ammunition, searching for clarity. There was one chain from 6 months ago. Elena had insisted on expediting a contract with a secondary supplier. I had flagged potential compliance delays. She had overridden the recommendation. Politely, firmly. I hadn't pushed further. Because she was CEO. Because unity mattered. Because public disagreement felt risky. Now I wondered if that decision was connected to the current delay she had publicly attributed to operations. I closed the laptop. For the first time, I questioned something deeper than performance. Was this about efficiency or control? On the 3rd morning, the audit report was scheduled to be presented in a closed board session. Elena arrived early. She didn't look at me when she entered the conference room. Her posture was steady, confident. The analysts placed printed copies at each seat. Thick, detailed. I noticed Elena's fingers hesitate slightly before lifting hers. Just a fraction. Then she began to read. And as her eyes moved down the first page, something in her expression shifted. Small, but unmistakable.
Elena didn't look up right away. Her eyes moved slowly across the first page, then the second. The board members waited. No one rushed her. I watched her carefully. The shift wasn't dramatic. No sudden shock, no visible panic. Just tightening around the eyes, a faint pause between page turns. The lead analyst, Marcus, cleared his throat. As requested, we conducted a focused operational and procurement audit. He began calmly. We reviewed supply chain delays, vendor compliance history, and executive-level contract approvals over the last 9 months. Executive level, not just operations. Elena's posture straightened slightly. Marcus continued. The 6-week production delay was attributed to a secondary supplier failing regulatory review. However, our findings indicate that the supplier selection and timeline acceleration were not initiated by the operations division. The room went still. Not tense, just attentive. Marcus flipped a page. The acceleration request was approved directly by the CEO's office, overriding the original compliance buffer recommended by the COO.
No one spoke. Elena didn't move. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Marcus kept his tone neutral. The delay was therefore the result of a strategic procurement decision, not operational mismanagement. One of the board members, Thomas Reed, adjusted his glasses. "So operations flagged the risk?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Email documentation confirms that Mr. Harlow recommended maintaining the original supplier to avoid compliance volatility." All eyes shifted, not aggressively, but definitively. Elena finally looked up. Her expression was composed, but her breathing had changed, slightly deeper, slower. "Context matters," she said evenly. "We were under pressure to accelerate Phase 3 trials." Thomas nodded. "Understood, but the board was informed last week that operational liability caused the delay." The word liability hung in the air again. Different now. Elena held Thomas's gaze. "My statement was based on timeline impact," she said. "Operations own timelines." I spoke for the first time since the report began. "Timelines depend on procurement decisions," I said calmly. "No heat, no edge, just fact." Another board member, Priya Malhotra, leaned forward. "Was the board informed that the compliance buffer was overridden?" Silence. Elena didn't answer immediately. "No," she said finally. Marcus continued reading. "In addition, we identified no structural inefficiencies within the operations division. Performance metrics remain within acceptable variance for a company of this scale." The sentence felt heavy in its simplicity. No applause, no vindication, just correction. Elena turned another page, slower now. I watched her closely. This wasn't humiliation, it was recalibration. Thomas folded his hands. "Why was the audit requested?" he asked. Elena inhaled. "To ensure operational integrity." "And what did it show?" he pressed gently. "That procurement acceleration introduced compliance risk," she replied. Her tone was steady again, but something underneath had shifted. The board session continued for another 30 minutes. Technical clarifications, risk mitigation steps, future oversight protocols. No one attacked her, no one attacked me, but the hierarchy in the room had subtly adjusted. After the session ended, the directors filed out quietly. Marcus and his team gathered their materials and left. Elena remained seated. So did I. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sunlight through the glass walls felt sharper than before. "You should have pushed back harder," she said finally. "I did," I replied, "in writing. I mean publicly. You're CEO." "That's not an answer." "It is." She leaned back in her chair. "I needed to move quickly. And I needed stability." Another silence. This one carried less tension, more awareness. "I shouldn't have called you a liability," she said. The admission was quiet. No audience, no performance. "Why did you?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Because I felt cornered." "By what?" "Investor pressure, board expectations, my own timeline." "And me?" "And you questioning the acceleration. So I became the resistance." She nodded faintly. "It was easier to attribute delay to operations than to admit strategic miscalculation." There it was. Not cruelty, not sabotage, deflection. I studied her. For the first time since the board meeting 3 days ago, she looked less like a CEO than more like my wife. "I never wanted to undermine you," I said. "I know. But you positioned me as risk." "I positioned the delay as risk." "Publicly," I corrected. She closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." We sat in silence again. Not hostile, not fragile, just honest. "What happens now?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. Now we adjust governance. Procurement approvals require dual executive sign-off. Shared control, I said. Yes. I watched her carefully. And personally, I asked. That question lingered longer. She finally met my eyes. I need to stop equating control with strength. And I need to stop avoiding confrontation to preserve unity. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched her lips. That's accurate. We stood at the same time. No dramatic resolution, no reconciliation speech, just a shift in posture. As we walked out of the conference room together, I noticed something subtle. Employees in the hallway weren't avoiding eye contact with me. They nodded, neutral, respectful. The narrative had corrected itself quietly. Later that evening, Elena stood in our kitchen reading the audit summary again. Not defensively, carefully. I moved too fast. Yes. And I projected that risk onto you. Yes. She folded the pages. I won't do that again. It wasn't a promise filled with emotion. It was a statement of recalibration. For the first time in months, the power dynamic felt balanced. Not because one of us had won, but because the truth forced alignment. The word liability still existed in the record, but it no longer defined me. And I think for the first time, she understood that leadership without accountability is the real risk.
The office felt different the next morning. Not dramatically. No whispers, no pointed looks, just a subtle recalibration in how people moved around me. When I stepped into the operations floor, a few team leads approached with normal updates. No hesitation, no careful tone. That told me something important. The narrative had shifted quietly overnight. Elena arrived 20 minutes later. She walked through the glass doors with her usual steady pace, but she wasn't scanning the room the way she normally did. She wasn't measuring reactions. She came straight to my office. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course." She closed the door behind her, not abruptly, deliberately. "I've been thinking about something Marcus said," she began. I waited. He didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. "That executive oversight needs checks," I said. "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I've been accelerating too aggressively." That wasn't easy for her to say. I could see it in the tension along her jaw. "You've been responding to pressure," I said. "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's context." She sat down across from me. "When I pushed the secondary supplier contract," she continued, "I knew there was compliance risk. I told myself we'd manage it later. And when it failed review, it was easier to attribute the delay to operations," I finished. She nodded. "Because operations are supposed to be stable, predictable, contained. And strategy gets to be bold." "Yes." A quiet realization settled between us. I didn't just deflect, I reframed. The word mattered. She hadn't lied, she had shifted emphasis. In board language, that's subtle. In marriage, that's dangerous. "I need to know something," I said carefully. She looked at me directly. "When you called me a liability, was it only about the supplier delay?" Her eyes flickered. "Partly," she admitted. "And the rest?" She didn't answer immediately. "The board has been questioning succession planning," she said finally. "Succession," I repeated. "They want clearer differentiation of roles, stronger executive hierarchy. And when we disagree publicly, it complicates perception. So you positioned me as operational risk to reinforce executive authority." She didn't deny it. "I thought it would stabilize investor confidence," she said. "At my expense." "Yes." The honesty was sharp. Not cruel, but sharp. I leaned back in my chair. "That's not governance," I said quietly. "That's optics." She swallowed. "I know." Silence stretched. Not angry, not wounded, just clear. "I've been trying to prove something," she continued, "that I can lead independently.
You don't need to prove that to me. I know. But you feel you need to prove it to them. Yes. I understood that pressure. Boards don't just evaluate results, they evaluate perception. And married executives complicate perception. You're afraid they see me as stabilizing influence, I said. Yes. And that makes you look dependent. She nodded faintly. I studied her carefully. This isn't about performance, it's about image. It started that way, she admitted. And then it became habit. Yes. That was the part that mattered. Habits of reframing, habits of deflecting, habits of protecting authority at the cost of partnership. You didn't need to protect your authority from me. She wasn't protecting it from you, she replied softly. I was protecting it from doubt. Whose doubt? She looked away. My own. That landed heavier than the audit report ever could. She wasn't fighting me. She was fighting insecurity. I let that settle before speaking again. The board trusts results. The audit reinforced that. Yes. But trust inside this room matters more. Her gaze returned to mine. I don't want to lead by minimizing you. Then don't. It's not that simple. It never is. She stood slowly and walked toward the window overlooking the city. I built this company with you, she said, but somewhere along the way, I started measuring leadership by distance. Distance from what? From dependence. And I became dependence. She nodded. I stood as well, joining her by the window. We can lead differently, I said. How? By not treating alignment as threat. She didn't answer. Outside, traffic moved steadily below. After a moment, she said, the board wants a governance review next quarter. That's expected. They may recommend separating executive roles. The sentence was careful. You mean one of us steps down? I asked. Possibly. I let that thought sit. If that happens, I said calmly, it won't be because of liability. She looked at me. It will be because clarity requires structure. She studied my face for reaction. There wasn't one, just calm. You're not angry, she said. I was, I admitted, but anger doesn't correct governance. That almost made her smile. You sound like a board member, she said. Maybe I should start acting like one. The remark wasn't playful, it was measured. She caught that. You're not considering stepping back, are you? She asked. I'm considering whether co-leadership is sustainable. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Not explosive, just real. You're saying this isn't just about an audit, she said. No. It's about how we operate. Yes. She exhaled slowly. I don't want to lose this company, she said, and I don't want to lose our integrity. Her eyes searched mine. Are those mutually exclusive? She asked. I hope not. That hope felt fragile, not because we were breaking, but because clarity always costs something, and neither of us knew yet what that cost would be.
The governance review began quietly. No dramatic announcements, no emergency meetings, just a formal notice from the board. Executive structure assessment scheduled for next quarter. 3 consultants, external, neutral. On paper, it looked procedural. In reality, it was personal. Over the next few weeks, Elena and I operated with careful precision. Meetings were cleaner, communication tighter, disagreements handled behind closed doors. From the outside, we looked aligned, but alignment born from caution feels different than alignment born from trust. One afternoon, Thomas Reed requested a one-on-one meeting with me. Not urgent, not alarming, just strategic discussion. I agreed. His office was quieter than the main floor. Bookshelves, framed industry awards, no unnecessary decoration. Evan, he began calmly, the audit resolved the immediate concern. I understand, but governance questions remain. I didn't interrupt. When 2 executives are married, it creates both strength and vulnerability.
Agreed. Investors prefer clarity, meaning clear authority lines, clear accountability. I held his gaze. And you believe that's compromised? I believe perception is sensitive. Perception, again. The same word from a different mouth. Do you question my operational leadership? I asked. No, he said directly. The audit reinforced your competence. And Elena's? Her strategic instincts are strong. There it was. Separation, division of praise. Then what's the concern? I asked. Thomas folded his hands. The concern is concentration of influence. Because we're married. Yes. Silence. Not accusatory, just structural. Are you suggesting one of us step down? I asked calmly. I'm suggesting the board may recommend role separation. The phrasing was deliberate. Meaning, either you transition to an advisory position or Elena does. The words didn't hit with shock. I had already sensed it. Has this been discussed with her? I asked. Not formally. I nodded. And what do you believe is best? He asked. The question surprised me. My belief doesn't override governance, I replied. That wasn't my question. I paused, then answered honestly. I believe leadership built on insecurity becomes unstable. Thomas watched me carefully. And leadership built on silence, he asked, becomes complicit. A faint smile touched his lips. You're more reflective than most executives, he said. That's not always rewarded. Sometimes it is. When I left his office, I didn't feel threatened. I felt clear. That evening, Elena was reviewing financial projections at the dining table when I came home. We need to talk, I said. She looked up immediately. What happened? The board is considering role separation. Her face stilled. For which of us? Either. She leaned back slowly. I suspected, she said quietly. Thomas confirmed it. Silence. Not reactive. Processing. And what do you think? She asked. I think this company can't be built on defensive positioning. She studied me. Meaning if one of us stays in leadership, it should be because it strengthens the company, not because it protects ego. Her jaw tightened slightly. You're implying I'm protecting ego. I'm implying we both have. She didn't argue. Instead, she asked the question that mattered. Would you step down? The air shifted. That wasn't theoretical. It was personal. If stepping down stabilizes the company, yes, I said carefully. Her eyes flickered. You'd give up COO? If that's what governance requires. She held my gaze for a long moment. And if they recommend I step down, she asked. I didn't answer immediately, because that question carried weight beyond structure. I would depend on whether you see it as correction or humiliation, I said. Her expression hardened slightly. So you think I'd take it personally? I think anyone would. Silence filled the space between us. She stood and walked toward the window. I fought too hard for this position, she said quietly. I know. I can't just relinquish it. I'm not asking you to. Would you resent me if I stayed and you stepped down? The question was steady, honest. I considered it fully. No, I said. Why not? Because I don't measure worth by title. She turned toward me slowly. That's easy to say. No, I replied. It's difficult to live. We stood facing each other. No raised voices, no accusations, just reality. What do you want? She asked. That question hadn't been asked in weeks. Not what investors wanted, not what perception demanded. What I wanted. I want governance that doesn't require one of us to diminish the other. That may not exist. Then we decide who the company needs more. The words weren't dramatic, but they were final. She looked at me carefully. You'd really let go? She asked. If leadership constantly requires proof through positioning, it's not leadership. Her eyes softened slightly. You're certain? I am. Silence again. Different this time. Less fragile. More grounded. She stepped closer. I don't want this to become a power contest, she said. It already was, I replied, gently. She exhaled. Yes. For the first time since the board meeting where she called me a liability, there was no defensiveness in her posture, just recognition. We'll hear their recommendation next week, she said. Yes, and whatever they decide, we respond with clarity. She nodded slowly. The next week would determine structure, but the real shift had already happened. We weren't fighting over authority anymore. We were confronting the cost of ambition without accountability, and neither of us could pretend we hadn't contributed to it.
The governance review meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. No press, no extended board session. Just Elena, me, the 3 consultants, and 5 directors. The room felt quieter than usual. Not tense, measured. The lead consultant, Margaret Liu, began with a summary. Operational performance remains stable. Strategic growth projections are strong. The recent audit clarified accountability misalignment. She paused. However, the board's concern centers on executive structure perception and decision flow. Perception again. Margaret continued. In dual-lead marital structures, separation of executive authority is often recommended to avoid perceived consolidation risk. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Our recommendation, Margaret said, is role differentiation rather than removal. Elena's fingers tightened around her pen. Clarify, she said calmly. Maintain both executives, but formalize strategic and operational autonomy through independent reporting channels. I listened carefully. Margaret went on. The CEO retains strategic oversight and investor relations. The COO operates with independent operational authority, reporting quarterly to a separate oversight subcommittee. Separate oversight, independent reporting, dual authority, but no forced resignation. The air shifted. Not relief, just recalibration. Thomas looked at us both. This structure preserves stability while addressing perception risk, he said. Elena nodded slowly. And accountability? She asked. Shared where appropriate, but procurement acceleration protocols will require joint approval. Joint approval, no unilateral override. I glanced at Elena. She didn't look at me. She was processing. The consultants concluded their recommendations. No applause, no dramatic conclusion, just formal acceptance of governance adjustments. When the meeting ended, the board members filed out. Elena remained seated. So did I. Margaret lingered briefly. This is not a corrective measure, she said quietly. It's preventive. Elena nodded once. Understood. When Margaret left, the room felt larger, less crowded. Elena finally turned toward me. They didn't ask either of us to step down. No, they diluted authority instead. They balanced it. She let out a slow breath. I thought they might choose. They did, I said gently. She looked at me. They chose structure over ego. That landed. We sat in silence for a moment. Not heavy, not fragile, just thoughtful. Are you disappointed? She asked. About what? That I'm still CEO? No. She studied my face carefully. You mean that? Yes. She nodded faintly. And you? I asked. She hesitated. I'm relieved, she admitted, and unsettled. Because control feels different now. Yes. The honesty didn't sting anymore.
It clarified. "We can operate inside this structure," I said. "If we don't undermine it," she replied. Yes. We stood and walked together, not as competitors, not as adversaries, just executives adjusting to governance reality. Later that evening, at home, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing the revised executive charter. "They added language about public accountability," she said. "I saw." She looked up. "I won't position you as a liability again." It wasn't defensive. It wasn't apologetic. It was direct. "I won't avoid confrontation to preserve image," I replied. That mattered just as much. She closed the folder. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "What?" "When I called you a liability, I thought I was protecting the company. And now?" "I realized I was protecting my authority." Silence followed. Not judgment. Recognition. "You didn't deserve that," she added. "No." Another pause. "But I also didn't push back publicly," I said. "You shouldn't have had to." "Maybe I should have." She leaned back in her chair. "We both misjudged strength," she said. "How?" "I thought strength meant control. And I thought strength meant restraint." We both let that settle. The next week, the new structure took effect. Independent reporting channels, joint procurement approvals, clearer documentation. Externally, the company appeared stable. Internally, something had shifted more permanently. Respect had replaced positioning. Not perfectly, but intentionally. One afternoon, during a follow-up board session, Thomas addressed Elena directly. "Your strategic acceleration remains valuable," he said, "but governance ensures sustainability." She nodded. Then he turned to me. "Operational clarity prevented escalation." I didn't react outwardly, but I noticed something. No one used the word liability again. The narrative had corrected itself. Not through confrontation, not through humiliation, through structure. That night, Elena stood by the window in our living room. "I almost let perception override partnership," she said quietly. "I almost let silence replace accountability," I replied. She turned toward me. "We could have lost both," she said. "Yes, but we didn't." "No." She walked closer. "I don't want leadership to cost us respect. It doesn't have to." She studied my face. "You didn't try to win. There was nothing to win." She nodded slowly. "That's why this worked." Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, the power dynamic felt different. Not because one of us held more authority, but because authority no longer required diminishing the other. She called me a liability once. 3 days later, she read the audit report. But the real correction wasn't in the document. It was in the structure that followed. And in the quiet decision we both made. Leadership without accountability is risk. But partnership without honesty is the real liability. And neither of us was willing to carry that anymore.